Nu skal det handle om The Order. Jeg har taget her til Stockholm for at se nærmere på Sonys nye eksklusive spil, The Order 1886. Så jeg har fået en snak med den tekniske mand bag ved spillet, og det kan du høre lige her.
All knights to arms! Let's eliminate these godless rebels once and for all.
So in a lot of like books and movies and games, there's like an underlying message. What would you say is like the message of the entirety of your game?
That's a good question. See, actually, one of the things that Rue, who's, he has created the story, created the world, and one of the things that he's really passionate about is kind of having I'm looking for the right word, gray type of area with the messaging. One of the things when you play The Order, you will see is that things are not what they seem, for one thing, and all of the characters, their motivations are clear. Everyone is doing, what they feel they need to be doing, but there are no real good guys and bad guys, or there is no messaging. In fact, if there is one message, I guess it's about understanding, that very often the image that you have of somebody else and the conceptions and the way in which you've been programmed to analyze reality around you turns out to be a lot more complicated than what you had thought.
You previously worked on games like Diablo 2 and God of War and PSP. Mm-hmm. How would you say that those games have influenced you today?
Well, particularly the games, when we started Radio Dawn, we had a plan, right? The plan was to, because even back then when we started in 2003, we already had offers at the time to do, what at the time was next gen, like, PS3 games and so forth. But we knew that we wanted to grow the team at a pace that we were comfortable with. The PSP seemed the perfect opportunity. When you're a game developer, the people are everything you have. Everything else is just, an illusion. Building the team is the difficult part, and learning your craft, because, none of us had ever started a company before. There were so many things we knew we didn't know, right? And the plan was always to really build the tool set and the understanding for the type of action game that we wanted to make. Daxter is a platformer. God of War is, it's ultimate action, third-person action game. So the goal was to really try to get the expertise in combat design, in platforming, and storytelling, and everything else, and then bring all of those ingredients together in our own IP and our own game designs. So we learned a ton. For this particular game, I think a lot of it was on the combat side, that really allowed us to understand the dynamics and the depth that is needed in order to have interesting combat.
Transitioning from handheld games with the PSP to now a full-blown new gen title on PS4, what would you say have been the biggest hurdle or challenge from going from one platform to another?
When we first pitched the God of War game on the PSP, David Jaffe himself didn't think it would be possible to deliver a true God of War experience. He said, you guys should do a 2D side-scroller, seems to make more sense. So when you started saying, no, we're going to deliver the console, home console quality, it is unbelievably difficult because you're constantly struggling to really push the limit of the hardware. The biggest challenge was really having the ability to grow the team with the same level of quality that we've always wanted, and being able to develop the amount of content that is needed now to create games like this. It's incredibly challenging. Finding the right people, keeping the right people, training the right people, it's very, very difficult. So, like I said, 90% of the effort has to go into the management and the growth of the team, and making sure that you find the right leads and the people who are in charge that can really do it. And it gets that, with the scope of the game, it gets exponentially more difficult.
The game is based on your own engine rather than just using someone else's engine. What made you decide to go for your own tech rather than using something established?
Yeah, from day one, well, when we first started with the PSPs, we didn't even have a choice really. There was nothing else. So we always had to do our own technology. When it came to the PS4, you have much more creative control. There is, if you look at the top games, they each have their own signature, their own style, their own, and these don't come just from the art and the artistry and the people involved. It also comes from the technology. Technology and art, they drive each other. The artists push you and you push back, and what ends up in the end is a combination of the two. And if you start with a preset, technology, especially if it's something that a lot of other people are using, you're kind of already in a sandbox. It might be a great sandbox. I'm not dissing it by any means, but if you have the luxury to be given the opportunity to explore yourself, I think it's a big advantage to be able to see just how far you can push it and really come up with new ideas and explore types of technology like the stuff we have done with rendering, with simulation, with physics. These are all things that we would have not been able to do if we had to start in another set of technologies. So it's a risk. It costs a lot in terms of not just monetary, but just time and effort, investment, and there are always risks. But we believe always that rolling our own is the way to make sure that we stand out and we do things our own way, one way or another, the good and the bad.
What made you decide to purely go for a single-player experience rather than having also stuff like co-op or multiplayer?
We're all big fans of co-op and multiplayer. That's not the reason. The problem is this new IP has very big ambitions, and Rue has created this huge, expansive world, and we felt that it was necessary to start to do two things. One, to pick our battles and focus on delivering the best experience we could without being ambitious to the point of diluting our ability to execute on many of the individual pieces. That was a big consideration. And second, we really felt that in order to introduce players to this world and these characters, it was important to have a focused and directed experience. And this one is told from the eyes of Galahad. That's the player that delivers, this story, and it's a very specific story that comes from him. The moment you start jumping around and things, you just can't quite deliver on the same level of narrative for that.
So beyond like the graphics upgrade with the new hardware, have you used the specific PS4 hardware in any interesting ways?
Oh yeah, many things. It's completely different. It's really there is so much that can be done, so much flexibility. I still really think we're just scratching the surface, but we are doing things. I'll mention again the cloth or the simulation stuff that we do. The cloth in this game, it's almost a character on its own. It's part of it. They have all these coats and these hanging pieces and the ropes, and they're so elaborate, and there are so many that we had to develop all kind of new approaches, not just to rendering, which we do. We have a custom cloth rendering technology that really gives it that look where the cloth sits in the scene. It looks like cloth. It doesn't look like plastic, shiny, wet plastic wrapped around characters, which is what you get in almost every game, I would say. But we do things like all of the interaction, and this is done globally. Everything that moves in the game is simulated with a consistent physics environment. And everything that interacts with the air does so volumetrically. So when you have a piece of cloth, it will actually catch the air as a solid. Normally cloth is done just, simulate a bunch of particles connected by some springs, and there you go, that's good enough. When you see the way in which it bubbles up and reacts and flaps in the wind and so forth, this is something that, probably takes as much CPU as some games of a previous generation spent for the whole game logic, It's just a different world. Now that we have the luxury of exploring this level of fidelity is because, these little boxes, they seem like such, cheap and relatively, innocent things that you put on under your television are actually quite sophisticated, and they're much more evolved computational devices than their price or their size would suggest. So it's a brave new era in terms of game development, really